It was a quiet Friday evening in the small town of Riverdale, where the streets usually emptied out as soon as the sun went down. The air was calm, the street lights dim, and most families were already inside their homes preparing for dinner or enjoying the start of their weekend. For Officer Daniel Briggs, it was supposed to be just another ordinary shift. After 8 years on the police force, he had handled countless late-night calls from small disputes to broken-down vehicles, and he expected this night to be no different. Around 8:47 p.m., his radio crackled with a new report from dispatch. Unit 23, we've got a call about a suspicious vehicle parked near Oakwood Park, black SUV, no movement for over an hour. Daniel responded calmly, Unit 23, copy that. I'm en route. He didn't think much of it at first. A parked car wasn't unusual, especially on a weekend night. People often came to Oakwood Park to relax, make phone calls, or simply enjoy a quiet moment away from the noise of town. But something in the dispatcher's tone made him curious. The caller had apparently mentioned that the SUV's headlights were on but the engine was off, and there was a single person inside, a woman who hadn't moved for nearly 60 minutes. When Daniel arrived, the park was nearly empty. Only the faint sound of CR. The following morning, Riverdale woke up to the kind of news that instantly changes the mood of an entire town. What had started as an ordinary Friday night now seemed like the opening chapter of something much bigger. Officer Daniel Briggs hadn't slept much. He kept replaying the events from the night before in his mind: Cassandra Hill's composed manner, the mysterious documents, the classified records, the unmarked SUVs, and the sudden federal security presence. Everything pointed to one conclusion: she was someone very important, someone whose identity was being deliberately kept secret. Weeks passed, but Riverdale still hadn't returned to normal. The town, once quiet and unnoticed, had become the center of national attention. News vans still lined the streets near the Grand Meridian Hotel, and reporters continued to search for answers about why the U.S. Attorney General, Cassandra Hill, had chosen this small town for such a sensitive operation. For Officer Daniel Briggs, life had changed completely. Everywhere he went, people recognized him: at the grocery store, at the gas station, even at his favorite cafe. Some stopped him to ask what really happened that night in the park, but Daniel had learned to answer with the same simple response every time: I can't discuss it. Despite the attention, he kept his focus on the job. The federal investigation was still active, and security around the hotel remained tight. Daniel had been assigned as a liaison between local law enforcement and federal agents, a responsibility he took seriously. It was an unusual position for a small-town officer, but after weeks of working closely with the federal team, he had grown more confident in handling complex situations. One evening, Daniel stood near the hotel entrance, monitoring the perimeter while the federal agents conducted another series of closed-door meetings inside. The night was quiet except for the hum of nearby traffic and the occasional clicking of cameras from persistent journalists. Suddenly, his radio buzzed. Unit 23, report to the operations room. Agent Parker wants to see you. Daniel quickly made his way inside the hotel, passing through multiple layers of security before reaching the makeshift command center set up in one of the conference halls. Inside, Agent Parker and several other senior officials were gathered around a table covered with documents and screens. She gestured for him to join them. Briggs, she began, we wanted to brief you personally. The investigation Cassandra Hill is leading is entering its final phase. Without sharing classified details, you need to know this much: information discovered here in Riverdale could lead to significant changes at the federal level. Daniel nodded, absorbing her words carefully. What kind of changes? He asked cautiously. Parker paused before replying. New federal policies. New safeguards. Possibly even reforms in how certain agencies operate. What's happening here is bigger than this town, bigger than any of us. Daniel understood then just how monumental the situation had become. Riverdale wasn't just the backdrop of a confidential operation anymore, it had become the place where decisions affecting the entire country were being shaped. As the days passed, activity around the hotel intensified. More officials arrived, more meetings took place, and security grew even stricter. Local residents speculated endlessly, but the federal team remained silent, releasing only minimal information to the public. Then, one morning, the Department of Justice announced a major press briefing. For the first time since the events began, Cassandra Hill would speak openly about the purpose of her visit to Riverdale. The announcement drew attention from across the nation, and within hours, hundreds of journalists descended upon the town. On the day of the briefing, the Grand Meridian's largest conference room was transformed into a press hall. Rows of cameras lined the back, microphones covered the podium, and reporters filled every available seat. Daniel stood near the side, assigned to help manage security while silently preparing himself for what Cassandra might reveal. When she stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. Dressed in a simple, elegant suit, Cassandra carried the same calm presence Daniel had noticed the first night they met. She looked across the room, acknowledging the crowd before beginning her statement. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice steady yet warm. "I know the past few weeks have raised many questions not only here in Riverdale but across the country. I am here today to clarify why I came to this town and what we've been working on." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle before continuing. "For the past several months, we have been conducting a highly sensitive investigation into federal operations affecting multiple states. Riverdale became a key location in this process because critical information surfaced here, information that required immediate, hands-on review." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as reporters scribbled notes furiously. Cassandra went on to explain that her visit had been necessary to ensure the integrity of the investigation, protect classified materials, and oversee evidence collection personally. While she didn't reveal specific details, her transparency about the overall purpose reassured many. "The work we've done here," she concluded, "has led to meaningful discoveries. These findings will allow us to make reforms that strengthen accountability, improve operational oversight, and build greater public trust. Riverdale has played an important role in this process, and for that, I thank the community and its law enforcement officers for their cooperation." Her speech was met with a wave of applause, flashes from cameras filling the room. For Daniel, standing at the edge of the hall, it felt surreal. He had witnessed this entire journey from the very beginning, from the quiet night in the park to this moment when Cassandra addressed the entire nation. After the briefing, the mood around Riverdale began to shift. The speculation started to fade, replaced by cautious optimism. Media outlets praised Cassandra's leadership and professionalism, and public sentiment grew more supportive. For the first time in weeks, the tension surrounding the investigation seemed to ease slightly. But for Daniel, it wasn't over yet. The federal team stayed in Riverdale for several more days, finalizing documents and securing classified materials. During that time, Daniel had several chances to interact briefly with Cassandra. She was polite but direct, often thanking him for his assistance and acknowledging his professionalism. One evening, as they crossed paths in the hotel lobby, she stopped him for a moment. "Officer Briggs," she said softly, "I wanted to thank you personally. That first night, you approached me calmly and respectfully, even when you didn't know who I was. Your discretion and professionalism have been noticed." Daniel felt a small smile tug at his lips. "Just doing my job, ma'am." "Sometimes," Cassandra replied thoughtfully, "doing your job means more than you realize." Those words stayed with him long after she walked away. By the following week, the federal operation officially concluded, and Cassandra left Riverdale quietly, escorted by her security team. The unmarked vehicles disappeared, the hotel returned to its normal business, and the streets began to feel like themselves again. Yet something had changed, not just in Riverdale, but in Daniel too. The experience had opened his eyes to a world beyond small-town patrols and routine calls. He had seen how decisions made at the highest levels of government connected directly to ordinary communities like his own. He had witnessed the careful balance between secrecy and transparency, between authority and accountability. And most importantly, he had learned that sometimes, even the quietest nights can hold the beginnings of history. In the months that followed, new federal policies were announced, policies inspired, in part, by the investigation Cassandra led in Riverdale. These reforms focused on improving oversight, ensuring fair practices, and strengthening protections for citizens. Riverdale was even mentioned in a few official statements, recognized as the place where significant change began. For Daniel, life gradually returned to its rhythm. He continued his work as an officer, patrolling familiar streets, helping neighbors, and supporting his community. But there was a quiet pride in knowing that, in some small way, he had been part of something that made a difference. Every now and then, as he drove past Oakwood Park, the place where it had all started, he thought about that first night. About Cassandra sitting alone in her SUV, reviewing documents under the dim streetlights. About the choice he made to check in, to stay nearby, to trust his instincts. One simple decision had connected him to a moment that would be remembered for years to come. Riverdale eventually regained its peaceful charm, but for those who had witnessed those extraordinary weeks, the memory lingered. And for Daniel Briggs, it was a reminder that even ordinary people, on ordinary nights, can find themselves standing quietly at the edge of history without even realizing it. But Daniel still didn't know the full truth. And he wasn't the only one. The following week brought a storm unlike anything Riverdale had ever seen. What started as quiet whispers in town had now turned into national headlines. News channels across the country were talking about Cassandra Hill's sudden appearance in Riverdale and the unusual level of secrecy surrounding her visit. Reporters camped outside the Grand Meridian Hotel, helicopters circled overhead, and camera flashes lit up the streets every evening. For Officer Daniel Briggs, life had changed almost overnight. He woke up each morning to dozens of missed calls, news alerts, and unanswered questions. Every network seemed to have a different theory. Some claimed Cassandra was in Riverdale for a confidential investigation, others speculated she was meeting with undisclosed officials, and a few even suggested there had been a security breach. The truth, however, remained carefully hidden behind layers of federal silence. Inside the police station, the atmosphere was tense. The local department had never worked so closely with federal authorities before. There were strict instructions: avoid speaking to the press, keep the streets around the hotel secure, and follow every protocol without question. Even senior officers weren't given full details about Cassandra Hill's purpose in town. Daniel spent his days helping coordinate patrols near the hotel, but his nights were restless. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman he had met in the park, calm, composed, and seemingly unaffected by the chaos her presence had created. There was something about her that felt larger than the moment, as though she carried secrets that could shift the balance of power. By the end of the week, events took an unexpected turn. A sudden announcement came from Washington: the U.S. Attorney General, Cassandra Hill, would be holding a closed-door meeting in Riverdale. No one knew exactly why, but the stakes became clear when several high-ranking officials flew into town, including members of the Department of Justice and federal investigators. On the day of the meeting, the Grand Meridian was transformed into a fortress. Security checkpoints surrounded the hotel, scanners were set up at every entrance, and federal agents managed the perimeter with quiet precision. The public wasn't allowed near the venue, but curious onlookers gathered on nearby sidewalks, hoping to catch a glimpse of something significant. Daniel had been assigned to assist with crowd management, standing along the barricades while keeping an eye on potential disturbances. As he scanned the crowd, he overheard snippets of conversation from reporters and residents alike. Why Riverdale? What's she hiding? Do you think it's connected to that ongoing investigation? Daniel couldn't answer any of their questions even if he wanted to. Inside the hotel, Cassandra was preparing for one of the most important meetings of her career. Though Daniel couldn't hear the discussions, he knew the stakes were high. Federal vehicles with tinted windows arrived one after another, carrying officials whose faces were familiar from television but rarely seen in small towns like his. By evening, the meeting concluded, and Cassandra stepped out alongside several senior figures from Washington. The cameras clicked rapidly, and the crowd surged forward slightly, eager to capture the moment. Despite the chaos, she remained poised, acknowledging the media briefly before disappearing into one of the secure vehicles. The entire event lasted less than an hour, but its impact was immediate. That night, major news networks broke the story that Cassandra Hill had been leading a confidential investigation involving multiple federal agencies, details still classified, but important enough to require her direct involvement on the ground. The headlines dominated every platform: Attorney General spotted in Riverdale amid federal investigation, secrecy and security surround U.S. Attorney General's sudden visit. The media frenzy didn't slow down. Speculation grew louder, and so did public opinion. Some believed Cassandra was uncovering critical information that could change the country's future. Others accused the government of hiding the real story. Within days, congressional committees announced they were monitoring the situation, and political leaders began calling for greater transparency. The pressure on Cassandra increased, and the tension was felt in every corner of Riverdale. For Daniel, the shift was personal. Overnight, he became part of the narrative. Reporters tracked down his name after learning he was the first officer to interact with Cassandra. Suddenly, journalists were calling his house, knocking on his door, and even waiting outside the station, all asking the same question: what really happened that night? Daniel avoided them all, sticking firmly to protocol. But the constant attention weighed on him. He wasn't used to this level of scrutiny, and the pressure made even simple tasks feel heavy. Then, one morning, everything escalated further. The Department of Justice released a brief statement confirming that Cassandra Hill would be giving a testimony in a high-profile federal hearing related to the events surrounding her visit to Riverdale. Though no details were revealed, the announcement sent shockwaves across the nation. The hearing became the focus of every news channel. Analysts debated endlessly about what Cassandra might say and what it could mean for the country. When the day arrived, the entire nation seemed to pause. Inside a large federal courtroom in Washington, officials, journalists, and observers filled every seat. Daniel, watching from his television back in Riverdale, couldn't look away. Cassandra walked in with her usual composure, dressed in a simple but elegant dark suit. The quiet confidence she carried the night they met was still there, but now it seemed magnified under the weight of the moment. The questioning began carefully, with committee members asking about her work, her presence in Riverdale, and her role in the classified investigation. She answered each question with precision, never revealing more than necessary, but enough to establish that her visit had been both planned and significant. Though the public still didn't know the full details, her calm demeanor reassured many. The narrative shifted slightly. Instead of suspicion, more people began expressing trust in her leadership and professionalism. However, the hearing also raised new questions. When pressed for specifics about what she was investigating, Cassandra cited national security concerns and refused to elaborate further. That small detail fueled another wave of speculation across the media, deepening the mystery surrounding the case. Back in Riverdale, Daniel followed every update closely. He could feel the ripple effects of what had happened in his quiet town spreading far beyond anything he could have imagined. A few days later, federal agents returned to Riverdale, this time with new instructions. Security protocols were being tightened around the Grand Meridian, where Cassandra would be returning for a follow-up phase of her investigation. Daniel was once again assigned to assist, but this time, he understood the gravity of the situation far more than before. Standing outside the hotel late one evening, He looked up at the glowing windows and thought about the strange path his life had taken. A routine call to check on a parked SUV had drawn him into a moment of national importance, a chain of events now unfolding on live television and in the halls of power. He didn't know what Cassandra Hill had discovered or why it mattered so deeply, but one thing was certain: this was far from over. The courtroom testimony had only deepened the mystery, and every passing day brought more questions than answers. Daniel felt it in his gut: something was building. Something big. And whatever came next, he knew Riverdale would never be the same again. By 8 a.m., the Riverdale Police Department was buzzing with unusual activity. More officers than usual were on site, senior officials were gathering in conference rooms, and everyone seemed to be talking in low voices. Daniel walked into the station, nodding at a few colleagues, but most returned only brief, distracted glances. Just as he was about to settle at his desk, his supervisor, Captain Reynolds, called him into his office. "Close the door," Reynolds said quietly. Daniel did as instructed, a sinking feeling forming in his chest. The captain looked unusually tense, his normally calm demeanor replaced by something Daniel rarely saw: unease. "Daniel," Reynolds began, "I need you to understand something. Last night wasn't just another call. The woman you encountered, Cassandra Hill, is part of an ongoing federal matter. As of this morning, we've received an official directive from Washington. You are not to discuss what happened with anyone, not even other officers, unless specifically instructed." Daniel frowned, leaning forward. "Captain, I understand protocol, but who is she?" Reynolds paused for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. "All I can tell you for now is this: she's a highly placed federal official. That's why the records were restricted, and that's why federal security arrived so quickly. There's a reason her identity is being kept quiet, and we are expected to cooperate fully." Daniel nodded slowly but couldn't hide his curiosity. "Sir, is she in danger?" Reynolds hesitated before replying. "Possibly. We don't have the full picture yet. What I do know is that she's connected to an ongoing investigation involving multiple federal agencies. That's all I can say." The captain's tone left no room for further questions, but Daniel's mind was spinning. He left the office, returning to his desk with more questions than answers. Within an hour, federal agents arrived at the station. They wore plain suits, carried slim folders, and spoke in precise, quiet tones. Daniel watched as they briefed Reynolds and a few senior officers behind closed doors. Everyone else was told to stay available but uninvolved. By mid-morning, Daniel was summoned into the briefing room. 2 federal agents were waiting for him, along with Captain Reynolds. One of them, a tall woman with sharp features and calm eyes, introduced herself as Special Agent Parker. "Officer Briggs," she said firmly, "we understand you were the first local officer to make contact with Cassandra Hill last night." "Yes, ma'am," Daniel replied, sitting straighter. "Describe everything," Parker instructed. "From the moment you arrived at Oakwood Park until the moment she left for the hotel." Daniel recounted the entire encounter, choosing his words carefully. He explained how he'd approached Cassandra's SUV, her calm response, the documents he noticed, and her eventual departure for the Grand Meridian Hotel. He even mentioned seeing the unmarked SUVs and the federal security team later that night. Agent Parker listened closely, occasionally jotting notes. When he finished, she exchanged a glance with the other agent before speaking again. "Officer Briggs, you may not realize it, but you were in close contact with one of the most protected officials in the country," she said. "Cassandra Hill is not just a federal employee. She is the United States Attorney General." Daniel blinked, stunned. The title hung in the air like a weight. The Attorney General. The highest-ranking legal authority in the country. The person responsible for overseeing the Department of Justice. And last night, She had been sitting alone in a parked SUV in Riverdale without any obvious security detail, without any visible escort. I had no idea, Daniel finally managed. Few people would, Agent Parker replied. She was traveling discreetly for reasons we cannot disclose at this time. Unfortunately, her presence here has drawn unexpected attention, which complicates matters. We are currently assessing potential risks. Daniel sat back, absorbing the information. Part of him was relieved to finally understand the scale of the situation. Another part of him felt unsettled. If the Attorney General was in Riverdale, and if federal agents were swarming the town, then something serious was happening, something far beyond the reach of local law enforcement. Before he could ask more, Agent Parker continued. We need your full cooperation, Officer Briggs. Last night, you interacted with her directly. That means you are now considered part of the chain of information on this matter. Effective immediately, you'll be reporting directly to us if any new developments arise. Daniel nodded without hesitation. Understood. After the briefing, the federal team left the station to set up a temporary operations center at the Grand Meridian Hotel, where Cassandra Hill was staying. Local officers were instructed to provide quiet perimeter support without drawing attention to the situation. By afternoon, subtle changes began appearing around Riverdale. More unmarked vehicles roamed the streets near the hotel. A temporary security detail was stationed discreetly around key intersections. And yet, to the average resident, nothing seemed unusual. Daniel, however, could feel the tension everywhere he went. That evening, Reynolds called him back into the office. Briggs, I know this is a lot, but I need you to be sharp. The feds are treating this situation as sensitive. Stay available, stay alert, and if you notice anyone acting strange, any unusual vehicles, anything out of place, you report directly to them. Yes, sir, Daniel replied, though part of him was still processing everything. Later that night, unable to shake his unease, Daniel drove past the Grand Meridian on his own time. The hotel looked calm from the outside, its glass windows glowing warmly, but he could see subtle signs of heightened security: men in plain clothes pacing near the entrance, surveillance vans parked strategically, and cameras temporarily mounted near street corners. He parked at a cafe across the street, ordering a coffee just to have a reason to stay. While he sipped slowly, his eyes scanned the area. Suddenly, he noticed something strange. A dark sedan had been parked near the hotel's rear exit for nearly an hour, its engine running. Inside, two figures sat motionless, occasionally glancing toward the lobby entrance. Daniel's instincts kicked in. He discreetly noted the license plate and immediately called it in to the federal team. Within minutes, two unmarked SUVs arrived, quietly surrounding the suspicious sedan. The figures inside were questioned, and after a few tense minutes, the car drove away under escort. Agent Parker approached Daniel later, nodding approvingly. Good call, Officer Briggs. You may have just prevented a breach in protocol. Though she didn't explain further, Daniel could sense the weight behind her words. Whatever Cassandra Hill was working on, it had drawn attention, the kind of attention that required constant vigilance. That night, as he drove home, Daniel thought about how much had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, he was handling routine calls in a quiet town. Now, he was indirectly involved in a matter connected to the highest levels of government. He didn't know all the details yet, but one thing was clear: Cassandra Hill's presence in Riverdale was no coincidence. Something important was unfolding, and soon, the entire country would find out. Tickets filled the silence, and the glow of the SUV's parking lights stood out under the dim street lamps. He parked his patrol car a few meters behind it, turned off his siren to avoid causing alarm, and stepped out carefully. As he approached, he noticed that the SUV was sleek and new, a high-end model, polished black, with tinted windows. Through the glass, he could just make out a figure in the driver's seat, leaning slightly forward, as though reading something. Daniel Briggs sat in his patrol car, his fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel as his thoughts kept circling back to the woman in the black SUV. Something about her still didn't feel ordinary. Her calmness, her paperwork, the federal seal he thought he saw on one of the documents, and now that strange advisory from dispatch about a possible high-profile government official passing through town. Daniel had been on the force long enough to trust his instincts, and tonight they were telling him one thing loud and clear: something was happening here, something bigger than a parked car. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 23, he said slowly. "Any more details on that federal notice? Do we know who the official is?" There was a brief pause on the other end before the dispatcher's voice returned, slightly hesitant. "Negative, Unit 23. The notice came from Regional Coordination, no names, no itinerary. Just a general advisory. If you see anything unusual, you're supposed to secure the area and report back." Daniel frowned. That was unusual in itself. Normally, when federal agencies shared information, there were at least some basic identifiers. But this time, nothing. He leaned back in his seat, his eyes fixed on the SUV just a few meters away. Cassandra was still there, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of her interior lights. She seemed so composed, so focused, as though the world outside her vehicle didn't exist. At that moment, another thought crept into Daniel's mind. If she really was connected to something important, maybe she didn't want anyone to know she was here. Perhaps she was keeping a low profile for a reason. That could explain why she hadn't mentioned anything earlier when he asked. The more he thought about it, the more cautious he became. Just then, Cassandra started her SUV. The quiet hum of the engine broke the stillness of the park. Daniel straightened in his seat, watching as she checked her mirrors, gathered her documents, and adjusted her seat belt. It looked like she was finally leaving. But before she drove off, she paused for a moment, almost as if debating something internally. Her gaze shifted briefly toward his patrol car. Their eyes met for a split second, and Daniel thought he saw something in her expression: not fear, not irritation, but purpose. Almost as though she knew exactly who she was, where she was headed, and why it mattered. She drove off slowly, pulling out of the park and heading toward the main road. Daniel hesitated. Protocol said the call was resolved, but his instincts told him not to let her out of sight just yet. Without turning on his lights, he followed at a safe distance, keeping several car lengths between them. The roads were quiet, and the glow of streetlights stretched across the pavement like faded ribbons. Cassandra's SUV moved steadily, unhurried, as though she knew exactly where she was going. After about 10 minutes, she turned onto an exit that led toward the business district, a part of town where several upscale hotels were located. Daniel stayed behind, careful not to draw attention. Eventually, she slowed and pulled into the parking lot of the Grand Meridian Hotel, the nicest hotel in Riverdale, known for hosting visiting executives, dignitaries, and sometimes even politicians. Daniel parked nearby, far enough to remain unnoticed but close enough to observe. Cassandra stepped out of her SUV, locking the doors with a soft click. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, she looked sharp, elegant, and composed, carrying a leather briefcase in one hand and her phone in the other. She walked with the kind of confidence Daniel rarely saw in everyday people. Inside the hotel lobby, Cassandra approached the front desk. Though Daniel couldn't hear the conversation from where he stood, he could see the receptionist's reaction: a momentary widening of the eyes, a subtle shift in posture, and then a hurried gesture toward a manager who came out immediately to greet her personally. That was the first real sign that his suspicions weren't unfounded. Whoever she was, the hotel staff knew she was someone important. Back in his patrol car, Daniel called dispatch again. "Unit 23 here. Can you run a quick check on Cassandra Hill? HILL black SUV, Out-of-state plates ending in 624. Registered owner matches the name. Anything flagged? There was a long pause this time. Too long. Finally, dispatch responded, their tone lower than usual. Unit 23, we're getting a no-access restriction on that name. That usually means classified federal clearance. We can't pull any records. Do not pursue further unless instructed. Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Classified clearance. That wasn't normal at all. In his entire career, he had only seen that kind of response once during a Secret Service escort years ago, when a visiting senator came through town under strict security. Now his curiosity had turned into unease. Who exactly was Cassandra Hill? Suddenly, his radio came alive again, this time with a different voice, someone higher up the chain. Unit 23, this is Captain Reynolds. Stand by for instructions. Daniel straightened immediately. Copy that, Captain. There was a brief silence before Reynolds continued, his tone measured but firm. Daniel, listen carefully. Do not engage the occupant of that SUV any further. Maintain distance, do not interfere, and do not make contact unless there's an immediate safety concern. Understood. Daniel hesitated before replying, understood. He hung up the radio, staring at the hotel where Cassandra had disappeared inside. Everything about this situation was getting stranger by the minute. He considered leaving, but something inside him, that same instinct that had kept him alive through a dozen unpredictable situations, told him to stay nearby. Something significant was unfolding, and he wanted to understand what it was. Minutes turned into an hour. Daniel remained parked discreetly near the hotel, sipping his now cold coffee and watching as people came and went. Business travelers, families on vacation, and a few late-night arrivals, all ordinary faces. But Cassandra didn't reappear. Then, just past 11 p.m., a pair of unmarked black SUVs arrived at the hotel. They parked in a restricted zone directly in front of the entrance, and 4 individuals stepped out, all dressed in sharp suits with discreet earpieces in their ears. They moved with coordinated precision, scanning the area as though securing a perimeter. Daniel recognized the pattern immediately. Federal security. His suspicions were now all but confirmed. Cassandra Hill wasn't just anyone. A few minutes later, 2 of the suited individuals entered the hotel. When they returned, Cassandra was with them. She walked between them calmly, still carrying her briefcase, and together they headed toward the black SUVs outside. Daniel watched as they opened the rear door for her, and she stepped inside without hesitation. Just as the vehicles were about to leave, Daniel's radio buzzed again. Unit 23, be advised, said the dispatcher, her tone unusually serious. Federal authorities are requesting full cooperation from all local units. Stand down and keep clear of the Grand Meridian vicinity until further notice. Daniel sat back, stunned. Local officers rarely received direct instructions like this unless the person involved was extremely high profile. Whoever Cassandra was, she clearly operated at a level far above anything he'd encountered before. The black SUVs pulled away, disappearing into the night with smooth efficiency. Daniel considered following them, but protocol and the very clear warning from his captain held him back. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just brushed up against something monumental. Somewhere deep down, he knew this wasn't over. There was a reason Cassandra Hill was in Riverdale, and sooner or later, that reason would become impossible to ignore. What Daniel didn't know not yet was that within hours, the entire country would know her name, and his night would become part of a story far larger than anything he had ever imagined. Daniel cleared his throat and tapped gently on the window, trying not to startle the occupant. The woman inside turned slowly, lowering her papers. Her expression was calm but focused, as if she had been deeply absorbed in her work. "Good evening, ma'am," Daniel said politely. "I'm Officer Briggs with the Riverdale Police Department. We got a call about a parked vehicle, so I just wanted to make sure everything's all right. The woman gave a small nod, opened her window slightly, and replied softly, "I'm fine, officer. Just reviewing some documents before heading back to my hotel." Her voice was steady, confident, not nervous like most people who were approached by police late at night. Daniel immediately sensed there was something different about her. She carried herself with quiet authority, and the way she spoke suggested she was someone accustomed to responsibility. Still, protocol required him to ask a few questions. "Do you mind sharing your ID, ma'am?" "Just routine." She reached for her handbag and handed him a sleek leather wallet. Inside was a federal identification card, but Daniel didn't look too closely. He barely glanced at the name, Cassandra Hill, before returning the ID and thanking her. "Everything all right here?" he asked again, just to be sure. "Yes, officer," she replied. "I've had a long day of meetings, and I just needed a moment to clear my head. I'll be leaving shortly." Daniel gave a polite nod and stepped back toward his car, ready to mark the call as resolved. But just as he was about to leave, something made him pause. Inside the SUV, Cassandra returned to her documents, but Daniel noticed the header on one of the papers illuminated by her interior light, an official-looking government seal. It sparked his curiosity. He hesitated, debating whether to ask more questions, but decided against it. She wasn't breaking any laws, and there was no sign of danger. His instinct told him to trust her word and move on. But as he turned away, his radio buzzed again. "Unit 23, status check. Caller's on the line again, says the vehicle hasn't moved." Daniel clicked the mic. "Unit 23 here. I've spoken to the occupant. Everything checks out. No concerns." The dispatcher acknowledged, but Daniel noticed something strange. The caller had been unusually persistent, making a second follow-up call even after his arrival. In small towns like Riverdale, it wasn't common for residents to be so insistent unless they had a strong reason to worry. Out of caution, Daniel decided to wait a little longer in his car, just observing from a distance. He watched Cassandra in her SUV, carefully turning pages, occasionally typing something into a tablet, fully immersed in her work. Her demeanor remained calm and composed, as though nothing around her could distract her. The minutes stretched into nearly half an hour. Daniel sat in silence, sipping his coffee and scrolling through routine updates on his onboard computer, but his mind kept drifting back to the woman in the SUV. Who was she? Why would someone so clearly important be sitting in Oakwood Park, in a quiet corner of a small town, late at night? Around 9:30 p.m., Daniel stepped out again and walked back toward the SUV. "Ma'am," he said politely, "I don't mean to intrude, but are you sure everything's all right? It's getting late, and this area tends to empty out fast after dark." Cassandra looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "I appreciate your concern, officer. I'll be heading out soon. I just have a few last notes to finish." Something about her tone reassured him again, but deep down, Daniel still felt unsettled. His instincts told him that this was not an ordinary situation. Just as he turned to leave for the second time, his radio crackled with a new update from dispatch. "Be advised, Unit 23, we've received an unrelated security notice from federal channels. There's an unconfirmed report that a high-profile government official may be traveling through the area. Keep an eye out and report anything unusual." Daniel froze. His mind immediately went back to Cassandra's documents, the government seal, and her calm, authoritative manner. Could it be connected? He looked back at her SUV, but she was now on her phone, speaking quietly and gesturing slightly with her free hand, her face illuminated by the soft blue glow of the dashboard lights. For the first time, he began to sense the weight of the situation, though he didn't yet understand its full scope. Whatever was happening tonight felt bigger than anything he had handled before. By now, the park was completely empty except for his patrol car and Cassandra's SUV. The crickets had quieted, and the stillness of the night made every sound sharper: the rustling leaves, the occasional distant car, even the soft hum of her SUV's electronics. Daniel decided to stay nearby, parked a short distance away, keeping an eye on the area. If anything unusual happened, he wanted to be ready. Unbeknownst to him, this seemingly ordinary night, a parked SUV, a routine check, a quiet conversation, was the beginning of a chain of events that would change his life, the town, and the entire country forever. Within the next few hours, secrets would unravel, shocking truths would surface, and Daniel would learn something about Cassandra Hill that would shake him to his core. But for now, he sat in silence, unaware of how close he was to history in the making.